Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Managing a Complex Multi-Tier Jenkins Environment, GitOps and Jenkins Job DSL Plugin in Practice. My name is Marites, and I'll be your moderator. I work with the marketing team here at GoToGroup, and I'm excited to be hosting this session today. I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Rasmus Praestholm. Rasmus is our Senior DevOps Architect and a co-founder at the Terasology Foundation. Most recently, his work has been applying the concepts of GitOps to various Jenkins-centric operations. Today, he's going to share tried and tested techniques on how he uses the power of GitOps with Jenkins Job DSL to support complex, multi-team enterprise environments. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session. We will send you the link afterwards. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. So if you have any questions during the session, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will bring them up after the presentation. We will have time for Q&A at the end. And last, we'd like to encourage you to share today's webinar with your social networks. So without further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming Rasmus Praestholm. Rasmus, over to you.
Hey everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I am presenting Jenkins Job DSL, which is a tried and true technique with some additional little angles to it to help with the complex enterprise. This is something I have been using for about a year at a large enterprise that we as GoToGroup are consultants for, where they have a highly complicated environment with more than 100 Jenkins masters, which are, challenging to maintain in a sane fashion. So this is an ongoing journey, and I invite you all to follow along and chime in with your suggestions and recommendations and alternatives you've tried. So to start with, the target audience for this presentation is complex enterprises, or the consultants, like GoToGroup in our case, that serve them. There is some usefulness in this just if you're wanting to use Job DSL or GitOps in general, but it is a somewhat sophisticated framework, and it's possibly overkill in some cases. However, it is a very good way to get started with some structure that you can sort of grow into over time. The problem these days is that, at least in large enterprises, you have a bunch of different teams, and they're all over the map. Especially in large organizations that have been around for years and years and years, you will have a pile of legacy teams. There are all kinds of different technologies. There are different drivers from the enterprise itself, and we're trying to make sense of all that together. Oftentimes, all these shiny new technologies get brought up, like CodeFresh and Drone and all these WeWorks techniques, and some teams might start implementing them individually and get to some degree of maturity in different technologies, but it's hard to make it consistently applied over the enterprise. Finally, GitOps has been showing up in the scene recently. First, we had Agile and DevOps and GitOps, and it's closely tied to Kubernetes, but that's not something that everybody is necessarily just ready to actually get started on yet. So, if you're a caveman, speaking metaphorically about development process, what is that going to help you? So, I came up with something I have nicknamed Hobo GitOps, and I'll get into more details later on what the differences is between Hobo and regular GitOps. But in short, it goes with the acknowledgement that the teams are going to be in different maturity levels. They're going to be doing different things. They're going to have different needs. So, true GitOps isn't necessarily going to be a good fit for all of them right now, but we can come up with something that will help them move towards it. I picked up 4 use cases where we have one team that's entirely on Kubernetes using all kinds of fancy Git operators and so on, one guy who really kind of wasn't in IT, but got pulled in there because he needed a website. Some good old traditional accounting software and VMware and all these kinds of things. Jenkins agents sitting on app servers for deploys. That's a very typical pattern from years ago, but also still today. And finally, a little bit of a rogue over here who likes Docker, but all this new structure is so restricted. He just needs access and he'll do his thing. And maybe occasionally something else. So, GitOps and why the hobo picture? Well, everything these days needs to have a little bit of amusement to it to keep people going. Transparency and other things are the latest buzzwords. And it's not just that you have a cube farm somewhere with a bunch of people and you tell them to do things. No, you have to really engage with and connect with your employees. And not just work professionally together, but have a good rapport and get along and enjoy your time together. So, let's see how we can continue. To more exactly get some background on GitOps, in case not everybody is super familiar with it, it is a term that was brought up by a group called Weaveworks, or at least they've been very active in helping define it, to where they are taking the existing world that is, where you might, if you're using Jenkins, you might be running your builds, your testing, your everything, even up to and including deploying stuff straight into application environments. Now we have Kubernetes and all kinds of new tech, and those old models start becoming kind of crinkly. Because the moment your Jenkins can also reach into your live environment, well, bad things can happen. So what we wanted to get to was we want to use pull requests and pull things into the environments rather than push them there from CI. So they have a lot of really good articles about what GitOps is, and I won't get deeper in it, but you can see this presentation and go read all the links, and all kinds of things on their blog is awesome. Just read it all if you have time for it. Infrastructure as code is also a well-worn, if recent terms, which is that you're trying to put absolutely everything you do in infrastructure in code. So you have version control for everything in your infrastructure. You might be using things like cookbooks and other things with Chef and Puppet and so on, and you have all that in your Git. You might be trying to automate things all over the spectrum, be it in bare metal, VMs, Docker, and so on. And you are provisioning things using SCM methods also true. You have various tools, and you trigger convergence with some process. This has some degree of segregated access, but not as much as it could have. Full-on GitOps pretty much requires Kubernetes. It's cloud native, and as it's put, it's an opinionated version of infrastructure as code. Generally, it means that your target environment, there's no direct action that access all actions taking place in there. You solely have your developers and operators modifying things in SCM. Then magic happens, and through this GitOps operator, it gets converged in the infrastructure, pulling in things rather than accepting further access to it in there. This allows very, very strong access segregation, which is a good thing in this day and age. Another highlight that Weaveworks put out was that GitOps is not CI ops. They really want a strong separation between your CI and builds and your continuous delivery and deployment. This does not support the nice old Jenkins deploy jobs where there's a build agent sitting on an app server somewhere and you hit a button in Jenkins and it goes to deploys it. I've used that. I love it. It's easy, but it's not the top of the line. It's not the best approach you can use. So we're trying to get away from that. Now, yes, I use it. Lots of people use it. Jenkins is such a wonderful tool, and we can do everything in it. So, that's fine, and that's where Hobo GitOps come in. Because, yes, you can start with this and make it slowly mature towards true GitOps and improve things incrementally and get better. So, that's fine. Do what you can and start moving forward. To contrast GitOps or true GitOps with Hobo GitOps. The GitOps block over here is the same as earlier, but it only works for truly mature teams that are able to work in Kubernetes and follow this entire opinionated pattern very, very specifically. Hobo GitOps uses IAC for configuring Jenkins itself, no matter what you're doing with it. It tends to empower teams to run their own things wherever they happen. It ideally uses Docker, maybe Kubernetes, but it can also use VMs and put things on old legacy bare metal and so on. It allows a gradient of access, so that on the left in your build environment and development environments and so on, there is more direct access for your developers, while it slowly gets to where nobody can touch anything, just like the true GitOps, and everything is done automatically and put into your environments. It has a concept of environment tiers, which is generally you start in development, then go through QA and into production, but you can customize that as you see fit. It uses a series of utility jobs in Jenkins that come out of these job DSL scripts. It segregates access between these tiers, so you might have some people with access to dev, while some have access to QA, and very few have access to production. And it's a fairly abstract pattern. It provides these hooks that your different applications teams can do stuff with, but it doesn't prescribe what they do with it. It really just says, okay, follow this pattern, write some DSL scripts, whatever they're doing, that's your thing, do whatever you like, but follow this basic foundation so that at least you can be sharing some pieces with other teams. It can support teams that go up to, including true GitOps, where you're just sort of having Jenkins itself go off and modify these infrastructure repositories and then have a true GitOps operator pull them into an environment. I like to say that the GitOps hobos live under the on-ramp that leads to true GitOps adoption. So it's a stepping stone. The tools used for this, I love Jenkins. I use it for everything. It is much like Sambo.com. You can do anything in Jenkins. It's not always the best tool, but it's always there and it always works if you put in the effort. Jenkins Job DSL is not new. It's been around for a long time. It has great documentation, API viewers, and all kinds of wonderful things. So it's easy to get started with, but it can be a little trickier to then actually develop on it. The setup I use here uses a layered seed job approach, to where a very, very first automated seed job actually comes in through an init script in Jenkins. So it's always there. And you just point it at a single manifest repo and utility repo to get things started. That's the bootstrapping that runs it together. The first kind of layer is Jenkins and the Hobo GitOps stuff itself, which uses one set of these manifest and utility job repos. This is all DSL scripts that live in here in the utility repo. So that sets up your foundation Jenkins with some general utility and the hooks for the dev teams to hook into. What they put in there themselves is really kind of up to them. The expectation is that they'll probably have a similar pattern, that they have a manifest that says, well, I have a Java web app, here's the name of it, here's the version that's currently on, and here is a DSL script that knows how to deploy it. And then you can say, okay, I'm now going to the next version, I'm going to bump my manifest, things happen, deploys happen, great. All this is backed by a Jenkins developer workspace that I've been working on and off for quite a while. This is not uncommon. Plenty of us have come up with a nice little local setup where you can get code completion and Java doc for Jenkins classes, because the documentation is great at times, but not always, especially when you get into the plugin space. There are so many plugins and they vary in how well they're documented. Sometimes you just gotta kind of surf the code and figure out what's going on. So I updated an approach I had myself along with this modern Jenkins thing I found on GitHub. It's a couple of years old by now, so I forked it and started making improvements. The way this then works is the top two layers up here is sort of the first half of this presentation or concept in that it helps you get started on using Jenkins well with Job DSL and GitOps and things. And then it can get more complicated. And this is kind of where you want to be at most if you have a very complicated environment. If you get down to here, you're lost in the woods. This is not where you want to be. And I imagine that there are probably people watching this that say, yep, that's us, that happened. Jenkins sprawl is definitely a thing. You start with just one little happy Jenkins that everybody uses, whether everybody is everybody in the company or a particular team that started with it. And then eventually you grow out of one and you might have one per team, but then it starts even getting messy there, and sooner or later you're out in the woods. For Hobo GitOps, the idea is, okay, you start with one team. This can be a pilot team, even if you're out in the woods and you have a ton of different Jenkins masters just floating around. You start with just one place. You apply infrastructure as code, and you get used to developing and testing things in Jenkins, like Groovy, scripting, pipelines, and so on. And you really sort of get used to it. You start putting this into source control. You get used to how it's done, and you start tempting teams to get interested. You know, we have all these neat automated tools. If you are willing to help share some of your cool things, we will let you in. The next stage is when you have more teams that are getting into this, and they each have their own Jenkins master. It can be different between the different ones. I mean, they're doing different things. They might not all be using the same plugins. They might be working different languages. They're certainly using different application environments. But some things they're doing can still be shared. And this framework helps put together some ways you can do this and share things better. Finally, in these two situations, or probably more this one and later, depending on how your teams are structured, say if you have a central ops team, I hesitate to use DevOps team because that's sometimes controversial, but there's some team somewhere probably that's more responsible for the tooling in your enterprise that includes Jenkins and Sonar and Nexus and all these things. If you're in a place where that team is the team that has admin access to all the things, and you don't sort of trust your teams to have full access because they can probably get to crazy things and so on, you can empower them to self-configure their administration settings in some cases by just putting some stuff in a source control repository and saying, okay, you just run this job and it'll update the thing you just put in this little repository. And I'll take a break here and show how some of the stuff is working before we get into the kind of crazy things down here. So I have this, this is this modern Jenkins workspace that I'm using online. And this ends up, if you just run it, following the instructions in the README, there are nice step-by-step setups to where you can have a local instance of this running, fully configured with Hobo GitOps and Job DSL and everything. It has a Vagrant box, which in turn will have a set of Docker images, which are the ones that then actually run Jenkins inside. That sounds complicated. It really isn't. These are all the steps it takes. And then you have something running at localhost 8080. It even includes its own embedded Git server so that you can use various sort of test early prototyping setups where you just kind of want to throw things in source control, but you don't necessarily want to use the enterprise required conventions and formatting and having a ticket in your commit message and so on. What this puts up is a local Jenkins at localhost. What it'll come up with is this GitOps utility folder, which has a bunch of these generic, useful utility jobs that do different things. For instance, if you don't want to give your developers the right to restart Jenkins willy-nilly whenever you want, well, you know, there's a job in here that can do it gently. It'll wait for the queue to finish up and then they'll finally restart. It allows you to configure shared libraries and configure an auth matrix and all kinds of things. And then you sort of just go from there. This is all the general utility. And at some point, you're going to get from the utility that is provided by your central team to, okay, now our actual teams have some sort of their own jobs that do deploys and things like that. So we'll see if the demo guys are with us today. This folder here is what comes up first. And inside it, there is a job that'll run and create all these jobs. There's one that will create deeper jobs. And finally, there's one that makes C jobs for the actual end user. The end user has a manifest repository where they're just saying things like, okay, I'm a team. My group name is sample team. I want to have this extra plugin installed called check noise because it doesn't have the check noise plugin. That's handy. And all my DSL scripts are in this particular sample repository somewhere. In this case, I'm just pretending that I have a team that uses some general Gradle builds. And this is going to just pop in and say, hey, here's some jobs. So let's see if this works. Ta-da, it worked. All right, so this now created a C job that's pointed at that URL in the manifest repo. If I run this one, it takes a little longer because there's actual stuff in there. Now we generated a whole pile of stuff. These would be the kinds of jobs that your end users are using. It could be CI jobs for building code if you want to automate the management of your build jobs. It could be deployment jobs. It could really be anything. So they end up going out here in these example folders. And since I'm just showing that, yep, they happen and they exist, I'm just letting them exist here and run and do things in the background. When I then actually go in here and as the centralized tooling team, I want to do some things. I want to write some DSL scripts. There are some homes in here in this little workspace where you can put together DSL scripts. And separately, I have a version that's just pure Groovy, because then you can start surfing the Jenkins code and see, okay, how does the Jenkins code work? Oh, okay, that's cool. I know what to do with it. At some point, you can run this multiple times. You're sure, okay, the thing does what I want it to do. This is a system Groovy job. It could be just a pipeline script that builds some code. You wrap it in DSL, which really is just this little piece up top. And this ends up then creating a job inside your Jenkins. This particular one is a utility job that will go in and determine, well, I am blessing this series of seed jobs that, yep, this is what I know is supposed to exist. What jobs are not currently being created by these? So in this case, because I didn't sort of whitelist the seed job that creates these guys, it says, well, you've got 33 jobs that aren't currently being tracked by Job DSL. That sounds messy. We want to be, fully automated, and this stuff isn't. What I can go in and say then is, well, that job is valid. There it is. Now this is my host OS, and I just changed, a script in here. Normally, you need to go in and actually edit a job in Jenkins. So in this case, I might need to go in and edit the actual job I have in here to, make this go away. But because this workspace is sitting in a Vagrant box that synchronizes into Docker and does all these crazy things, it actually synchronizes it in, so I don't need to go in and edit. Because I edited this job right here, and it's managed by this embedded C job, I just run this job. And let's see if it did the thing. It's no longer commented out. Even though at no point did I have to go into the Jenkins UI and edit things manually, it just all synchronized in my little local workspace. So if I run this thing now, nope, all right. Now I only have 2 jobs that aren't in my track list of things I know about. So this really helps you work Job DSL in a hurry, because you don't need to check in code and source control. You don't need to open, configure on a Jenkins job, and then start messing with the script in place. You can just roll forward, do great things, and when you're happy with it, okay, time to put it into your official CI. So let's get back to the presentation. If that's all you want from Job DSL, well, that's a good beginning. You can start saying, okay, that one Jenkins I just shared, all right, let's set an environment variable that's team X. We'll put DSL for that team in there. They can keep running things and develop things to their heart's content and go nuts. And, you know, it's a little better now. The stuff they're doing is tracked to a point. And we can start doing this between multiple teams, and we can say, okay, if team Y came up with something really cool and useful, well, how about you make it generic and share it with the whole class, and we put them in one of the central repositories that just spreads it out to every team out there. That's where it starts getting kind of useful, but it's not quite this level of crazy yet. For this part, we're getting into a whole other topic. So, in this case, really, you tend to just have your own current Jenkins and its production. And you've probably been used to going into your Jenkins and just tweaking on it on the fly, and well, okay, it works. Sure, it's technically production, but it's just Jenkins. It's not like it's the production for your application. It's not like it's something your end users are seeing on your actual public website and so on. Be that as it may, large enough enterprises, you have internal customers. You don't want somebody on Team Y to accidentally do something that, whoops, that just broke a whole bunch of things in here while somebody else on the team actually was working on a hotfix for the production deployment. So that's kind of bad. And again, if these Genkai managed applications that are live and use something like a deployed agent to actually update it, well, if somebody ran a job and updated the wrong environment in production, that's kind of bad. So the full Hobo GitOps treatment also comes up with these tiers, where you have, say, dev, QA, and production, so that you segregate these things apart. You have, you know, a lab Jenkins, which might be hooked up to a little handy workspace where you can write your DSL, and then you can test it in there. And maybe if this is the dev Jenkins, this is QA, and this is production, couldn't we just kind of like hook them up to the corresponding dev environment for that team, so that we can have the dev Jenkins try out things in the dev environment before you ever get to QA? In the old world, that might have been just different sets of jobs inside the same Jenkins, but then you get the problem that if you accidentally ran something that was supposed to go to development and it went to production, well, bad things happened. So if you segregate these things into different Jenkins masters, or use some different kind of CD tool, there are plenty, and that can be hooked up as well. But since I'm crazy about Jenkins, I use Jenkins for everything. At this point, you get into the operations file pull requests from GitOps, which is where, okay, I finished and tested my thing in dev. Let me put it into QA. So since everything is the source control, you can make pull requests that go to the next level, have somebody else review it, and somebody else presses the button. And then automatic things can happen without you ever having access to QA. Maybe it goes in there, does a smoke test before it turns it over to the actual QA team. Cool stuff. That's where this framework aims to get you when it talks about complexity in the enterprise. You don't want to go down here. You can start here, but you will end up here if you're not watching your spoil and not staying on top of things. So you've got to be careful. So back on track to sort of the second part of it. For these use cases, again, Alice was ahead. And the idea is, okay, she already has a whole bunch of cool things with Kubernetes and so on, but what if that could be customized, or be codified, and put into Git so all teams could take advantage? Maybe she could help write some of these generic DSL utility jobs that help you update a Kubernetes environment, or even instantiate an initial Kubernetes cluster that will hold your applications and so on. she can try to adopt sort of the structure of these manifest repos to meet at a common lowest common denominator. And since she is using full-on Kubernetes, she probably knows a thing or two about how true GitOps works and can help prepare whatever the favorite enterprise tool is, so that other teams can have an easier time getting there as well. For those stuck on teams that aren't really far ahead, well, that lowest common denominator, just here's a Jenkins. It's safe. It doesn't have access to anything crazy, but it'll let you begin and start doing cool things. Maybe there's a bunch of template jobs that'll do code metrics and analytics, so that even though it is just a silly website, maybe you can catch some security vulnerabilities in it. And finally, you can say, okay, my code lives over here, and this is the environment, rather than just some guy over in the corner of the cube farm knows something about what other things. So codify things. You have users that are using some technologies better than others. And again, they can adopt some things and they can help share other things. They can help set up best practices to segregate access and get more on top of version control things. And finally, if you do have a rogue somewhere who really likes having access to production directly, this is perhaps a gentle way of pulling back the access that's there, while you can still have some kind of cool continuous delivery. Just go press a button in Jenkins instead of running a Docker command locally. It's not that much more difficult, and it adds some nice structure. So, how do you then actually codify all these things? What do you manage? What do you structure? What is it? In the setup I've come up with, I call it a stack. That some sort of service that a team is working on is a set of probably microservices that work together to do some functionality in some sort of app suite. And as I've mentioned so far, they are probably living in different tiers. You probably have a dev environment, a QA environment, and a production environment, and things vary and travel between them. You probably have some secrets management and such going on, and ultimately all this results in some instance of an environment somewhere that's configured as per all these things. And that's kind of what this manifest overall aims to arrive at. I want an application from this stack with these tiers so that we get these environments that have been populated with all these kinds of secrets. The way you do the GitOps thing, operations on pull request, would be, okay, maybe we have AWS accounts, and there's a dev one for the team, and there's a QA one for the team, and there's a quad one for the team. That helps segregate access, it helps reduce blast radius. And then we have this environment manifest that says, okay, in dev, we've got version 1.2.3. QA still has version 1.2.2. So let's make a pull request that says, okay, that stack that's at version 1.2.2? Okay, this pull request bumps it up to 1.2.3. When you merge it, the QA Jenkins master sees that and says, hey, somebody approved that we upgraded our application to 1.2.3. I'm going to run the deploy job that sets it up in this account. And then likewise, when you go to production, you make a pull request from the QA repository or branch or however you organize it into production. Same thing happens. Production gets updated. It's not terribly difficult to just explain it, although it will vary heavily on your teams and what you're doing, how you actually pull this off. So again, it's a model. It's not a full implementation. Jenkins is just sitting there watching and triggering something. It's up to you to define what that something is. At this giant place that we work with 100 Jenkins masters, it gets kind of crazy. But we've started thinking about things in stacks. So we're the central tooling team. We have a CI toolchain stack, which consists of Jenkins, Maxes, Sonar. All of them are built out of specific Docker images. We bundle them with a bunch of plugins and all kinds of things. That's our CI toolchain. So we have dev environments for it, and we'll test things out, and then we can push it to the next one, and we can push it to the next one. Likewise, we're working on this Hobo GitOps toolchain, which is also a stack that contains Jenkins, but it's a different instance of Jenkins. It doesn't need all the build style plugins for Jenkins. It can do with just whatever it needs to do continuous deployment and delivery. So this is smaller, and it hosts the Jenkins masters that then manages these different team environments, including completely other teams that have whatever application. I don't know what they have. We just have all the automation that says, hey, here's a dev Jenkins, a QA Jenkins, and a board Jenkins. They can access your accounts, put some stuff in a manifest and a DSL repo that knows how to find your stuff and deploy it, and then just hit buttons or merge PMs. There's some kind of crazy chicken and the egg situation with, well, what stands up the Hobo GitOps toolchain and what stands up the CI toolchain? So there's some interesting back and forth there, but I have too many technical details to hold this within an hour, so that's something that can go in the Q&A or touch base on at some point in the future. To get a little bit more simple again, is the high-level view of these involved pieces is you have sort of the thing that does Jenkins, which is what a central team would maintain. There's going to be some sort of base image of a Jenkins thing that then says, okay, for this given team, go use this manifest and pull in some details for them. And here's a bunch of utility jobs. Okay, here is the fundamental Jenkins that knows how to do a thing. It has a bunch of utility jobs, and then it comes down to the team it's for to add more stuff to it. In this case, for instance, we're talking about a dev tier deploy Jenkins. So there's some app team. They have defined a manifest for their application that has said, okay, this application uses stack so-and-so. It's at version 1.2.2. Here are some DSL scripts that create Jenkins jobs that know how to update it in some environments. And this thing has access to the environments, and it has access to some sort of artifact repository where it can go and get the things it needs to do the deploy. So one part is the foundation, one part is what you build on top of it, and whenever your app team is doing their work, really it's just a single pull request that goes in here and says, hey, I want to go from the 1.2.2 to 1.2.3, make it happen. All right, lots of diagrams. So you can do a lot. It varies on your needs. Find out who your hobos are. What are your teams? What are they doing? What do they want? What do they have that can be repurposed and really shared between all your teams to help them increase their maturity at an individual team level? The way you can get started with this is, like many things, you start small. In this case, you can grab the workspace attached to this demo, to this presentation, and start practicing, okay, Job DSL, okay, system GUI scripts for Jenkins, and manifest repos, DSL repos, and so on. And just within team, play with this and see, do you like it? How would you want to go with it? You then find some pilot teams. Ideally, you would dog through this yourself, like we might do with our CI tool chain, where we have Jenkins, Sonar, and Nexus. And other teams, every time you onboard a new team, you'll learn new things and come up with new shared utilities, and you'll kind of grow your stable of tools to be able to be better positioned to help onboard the next team. You probably will develop neat runbooks for architect teams, like maybe there's one team that does Java web apps. Maybe they have a particular set of shared libraries and things that they use. And then just over time, you just grow the circle. You start with the experts, the ones that don't mind living on the cutting edge, and then slowly over time, you reel in the rest. And the more convenient you can make for the different teams, the less burden of adoption do they have, and the more readily they are to get on board with the whole thing. Finally, at one point, you might not have to call your teams hobos anymore. They might be able to run true GitOps. But, it's a long road to get there. So, what's new in the short term for this framework itself? So, it may sound a little bit like Jenkins X or even Cloud Beast Core, which are super cool projects. I've played with both of them. I love playing with them. And this is kind of like the poor man's version of it, because you can do this, you can do that. It's free. You can do it yourself, but it is effort. You're not getting all kinds of really super cool, smooth, enterprisey, paid-for features. But it's perhaps a stepping stone on it. Jenkins X is great right now, but there can be some challenges in managing multiple instances of it if you want to have Jenkins X running on different teams. And you might want different Kubernetes clusters for each team and so on. There are some ways to manage it, but you could also do something like that with Hobo GitOps. Currently, most of the utility jobs are essentially converted init scripts for Jenkins, which means that they are in system Groovy steps. Init scripts are kind of going out of style, I like to think. I'm pretty ambivalent about them because they require Jenkins restarts, and they have some kind of vocationally severe limitations. But you have to go look in the Jenkins system log to see what they did. It's not a job. So I want to take these utility jobs and put some of what used to be in an init script, like here's my sonar. Okay, let's configure that with Jenkins configuration as code, but store that in a manifest repo so that when you start your Jenkins, it will run through everything you have configured in CACS, but you will also be able to run these utility jobs live and see it happen without having to restart and customize it to your heart's content. We are playing with Git operators to like Flux to see, well, how about we hook up a Hobo GitOps workspace to a Kubernetes cluster that's managed by Flux. So instead of having necessarily a dev Jenkins master, a QA Jenkins master, and a prod Jenkins master, you might only have one that then hooks into different Flux operators. Another related note on this slide is that serverless Jenkins is a thing now, and these CD tier Jenkins kind of don't need the UI. I mean, they kind of just respond to a pull request and then take an operation on some environment. So you might as well run the serverless version of Jenkins, and you just have a webhook. That's another possibility. I set out on this journey to manage tools other than just Jenkins. So, for instance, in Next and so on earlier, we had Docker images for them. So I should be able to say, hey, spin me up an environment for this team, but also fill in a Nexus and so on. Again, that's something Jenkins X does, but you can also do it the whole man's way. And I want to be able to run this as a consultant for different clients, different teams, using all kinds of these different configured stacks. Maybe I want to run it both against some things in AWS and some things on Google Cloud. And I want to make more of these utility jobs. One thing that is often a problem when you end up in a Jenkins sprawl situation is that you have different plugins on different Jenkins masters, especially if you empower your users with admin access. This can become a kind of a mess. There is a job already that will go out there and install whichever plugins a team has asked for. But another one I've been playing with is one that says, well, what's actually installed versus what's in our base set of plugins plus whatever the team has defined as their extras. This almost gets into something that CloudBees calls a speed keeper, where you're getting a better report on what's going on. So this is another spot where Hobo GitOps is sort of a stepping stone. If you really truly need the power of something like CloudBees Core, this gives you a little bit of a taste of it. But, you know, CloudBees Core is a lot. So this is sort of the lighthearted version of it. And finally, I want to get full-on samples of Hobo GitOps managed applications with actual things running in Kubernetes clusters and so on. But, you know, they're only 24 hours in a day. So that's really it. And I think that gets me to approximately 15 minutes left for questions and so on. So I'll turn it back over to Marites and Leo and others if there's anything that's coming.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rasmus. It's now time for Q&A, and again, you can type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. So we have a couple of questions here from the audience. Can you apply the concepts and practice of GitOps if you are not using Kubernetes?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the earlier slides talked about how this process uses infrastructure as code to configure the Jenkins setup itself. Let's see if I can find the right screen for it. So a fun and perhaps mildly confusing version of how this whole setup works is that Hobo GitOps uses Hobo GitOps for itself. It's Jenkins masters all the way down. So whereas I have, here's a neat new Job DSL script I want to apply it everywhere. But, I don't want to go edit all these different Jenkinses on my own, and I don't want to just throw it out there in some central repository and all Jenkinses will just pick it up automatically. So I do have the concept of having a dev Jenkins, a QA Jenkins, and a pro Jenkins for Jenkins itself, where you can say, okay, I have this new Job DSL powered super utility job, and I've tested it in my dev environment. I can also use GitOps to pull that forward into the other Jenkins masters and other teams because I have everything in source control. I don't need to go in here and say, okay, I have this thing in my dev branch. I'm going to merge it into master. I can go there and do a pull request that says, okay, I have the new thing. This is the version 1.4.3 of my Hobo GitOps platform, and I want to apply it everywhere. And then I have an actual QA Jenkins for Hobo GitOps itself that goes and watches that thing. And when I merge my thing into QA for validation by the different teams, it goes and automatically updates all of the QA tier Jenkins masters all over the place. So the different teams can go and say, well, okay, we can use the updated stuff to deploy our application to its QA environment, which validates that, yep, the Jenkins changes are good, and they have essentially been brought forward by GitOps in that sense, operational full. It isn't full Kubernetes, but it is following in the same spirit, and it can be super duper useful.
Thanks, Rasmus. Another question is, what's the difference between the pull and the push models? I understand that GitOps is operating on a pull model approach. Can we use both with GitOps?
So you can. As I noted earlier, the model that Weaveworks uses, I think of as true GitOps. In true GitOps, you for sure are only using a pull model in your actual environment. You're updating this configuration repository, and the GitOps operator updates your cluster, and that's it. There is no pushing anything into the environment, period. It is solely handled by the operator, pulling things in from an image repo and a configuration repo that you don't have access to. But I said, this is the fancy Kubernetes interface. If you just have a, say, a VM, that's your production environment. It's not Kubernetes, but you can put a Jenkins agent on there, which is kind of like a GitOps operator, kind of like a Hobo GitOps operator. And then when you want to deploy to that environment, you go hit a button that's a deploy job to push changes into that environment. So that isn't super GitOpsy, but it is an example of where you can use push, even though you are using these Job DSL and manifest repos. Just your deployment process is kind of old school in that it's really just a Jenkins agent living on an actual application server, which is a VMware VM somewhere. So yes, it again comes down to what your teams do and what they need. And just by getting them further along on applying more structure, you reduce the distance between an already infrastructure as code, codified approach with some Hobo GitOps. It's much, much closer to then make the jump to consider true GitOps in the future, where you drop the push model and go to pure pull.
All right, another question here. One of the challenges with relying on a pull model to deploy changes is that anyone with commit rights becomes a production deployer. We have been
Right.
told by our security officer that this is not a good security practice. Can you give us some insights on how to enforce compliance with security standards?
Yes. So that is what the tiered approach is really for. So in the setup where you have dev environment, QA environment, product environments on separate AWS accounts because security is paranoid, and then they don't want somebody who has access to the QA environment to automatically have access to a works environment. And just because you give a developer access to an environment manifest, you don't want an operator to just pull that into an environment spontaneously. The way that this is meant to be set up is in the sort of most possible complicated setup. Say you're using Bitbucket. You may have the application, the developers and their applications running in one Bitbucket organization, where they have full access to everything, they can change whatever they want, and they have a dev Jenkins that can reach into a dev account on AWS. So anytime they make changes here, everything just automatically happens in dev because they kind of own dev. Great. So you have the true GitOps operator, it applies things immediately to dev. But then you have a fork of this environment manifest repo that lives in a completely different Bitbucket project where there's far less access. At this point, maybe only the QA lead or a dev lead or somebody has merge money on pull requests that aim at this fork of the environment manifest. So at this point, very, very few people can get in and actually make the bit repository, even though the developers can still go nuts and play with all the tools down here. And then just when somebody's ready, say the QA manager says, yep, our environment is ready to be updated, they just go and say, okay, here's the pull request that promote the 1.2.3 into QA. They hit the merge button, the Git repo in here gets updated, and that triggers the process to deploy things into QA. And then likewise, maybe your release manager is the only person who has right access to this fault, which is living in a production Git project. So only that one person, hopefully they have a second somewhere so that if they get hit by a blast, nothing terrible happens. But just that one person decides, okay, when do we allow this staged change to promote into this tier? And when that happens, again, the production line is okay. This is very heavily inspired by how Jenkins works and does its promotion model, where it also configures, okay, here are my environments, I want my development environment and staging to be auto promote whenever new stuff is available, but I want production to only happen when somebody manually merges them. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but you absolutely can do it to make you pretty happy. Although, of course, balancing happiness between the developers and the security team is probably a never-ending battle.
All right. Another question here. Last question. Um, are there advantages of using Job DSL jobs over using the Jenkins configuration as code plugin?
Okay, so Jenkins configuration as code is really meant to, configure Jenkins itself at a high level and, setting up all the different settings in your managed Jenkins and those kinds of things where this is how I want my Jenkins to look like. And as the Jenkins admin, that's great. You can push this out everywhere and make everybody follow the same very, very specific things. I don't actually recall how far it has gotten when it comes to making jobs. Usually I use a combination of sort of the initial bootstrapping init script, which gets a job DSL seed job going and can do whatever I want with job DSL, while I then also may have separately configured a bunch of things with same configuration of code or init scripts that just gets the Jenkins itself ready. What job DSL really allows me to do is that I can hand out access to where developers can write their own jobs, or I can myself write these jobs and not even give configured access to jobs. But I can say, and I have one of the examples in here for it. Right. Let's get to the right spot. say, for instance, I don't want anybody to have super access to, actually, let me show this thing first. So in here, in global security, I currently don't even have security on, so that's not going to work very well. But normally, you might have some sort of matrix-based security in here, where by default, only your super admins have access to it. You can go in here and then say, well, I want to be able to allow my team leads to then give access to their subordinates where they can go in and get a certain level of access to Jenkins, which is what they can go and say, well, I want to put some more super admin in, which gets read by this job. Let's see if it works. I don't remember. Might be another demo guard type thing. No, let's see. It'll work this fine. So this set up the auth matrix. So now there's a whole auth matrix in here. This is not necessarily something that you know at the time you're writing or uploading a bootstrapping Jenkins configuration as code set up that sort of does the overall global configuration. Maybe a new guy started on Monday, and you don't want to rely on the essential team to go in there and give that person access if for some reason you just give people direct access to Jenkins. Chances are you're using cloud or some sort of group management setup. But in short, you can delegate access to do all kinds of neat, useful things with Job DSL generated jobs that you might have a harder time setting up the configuration as code. But really, they work really well together, and that's why one of my future to-dos is actually switch over and use Jenkins configuration as code as my manifesting language, so the Jenkins at first starts up configured that way, but then also extends into, well, I want to add a new guy and just run the job and it's done, rather than having to restart Jenkins to pick up a change in Jenkins configuration as code or in an script. So hopefully that helped answer that. They are complementary. They go well together.
All right. Thank you very much, Rasmus. Before we end this session, I'd like to remind everyone that if you have more questions, you can send email to me, to Rasmus. You can find my email ID from the invite. And you can also catch Rasmus and the rest of the GoTo Group team at DevOps Jenkins World 2019 in San Francisco from August 13 to 15. So I would like to thank you all for joining this session, and I hope to see you all again soon. Please stay tuned for more insightful webinars from GoToGroup. Goodbye.